There's only one guy that I know, the guy that I think is a genius when it comes to connecting the dots in nutrition, and that's Joel Greene. How you doing, Joel?
I'm doing great, Carl, man. Good to be on the show. Thanks for having me, and yeah.
You and I have had lengthy discussions when I've been out at Quest where we've, sequestered ourselves into a conference room, and you started to show me the connections between certain nutritional components and everything from getting alcohol out of the system faster to increasing the fat utilization from meal to meal. And I thought, well, there's only one guy that I need to talk to about this. And I said, well, can you do 10? And you said, well, I can do more, but we called it 10. And these are going to be food and supplements. But the reality is that anybody who really wants to dig deep into this needs to go to veep.com and sign up for a membership and have access to this kind of stuff all the time. And you can do your entire meal planning based on burning fat. So before we move forward, I'm going to ask you a point-blank question. Is there such a thing as a food or supplement that will increase fat utilization in the body?
Yeah, actually, there's a number of ways you can have that combo, and it just depends on what it is specifically that we're talking about. A lot of these things get confused, so it might be helpful kind of up front to parse out like these different concepts into what they really are. So, there's the idea of resting metabolic rate and increasing that, and that's a different thing from what we call adaptive thermogenesis or getting uncoupling proteins in brown fat and muscle to kick in to essentially increase the energy expenditure, the amount of heat that's being released through the mitochondria. And that's different. And then that is itself part of a bigger conversation, which we would call brown fat browning. And that's a big area of research right now. And then also in that, we can throw in what we would call energy harvest, which was just how much energy you get from food. And so all these things are things that we can look at, touching on to basically get the end game, which is we want to burn more energy, and we want to do it in ways that save us time. So, yeah, it's definitely possible. I mean, the simplest, like dumb thing that we can look at is just, and it's not even debatable, is just simply protein. Protein increases metabolism. I mean, that's kind of a no-brainer. We all get that, right? And so let's just start with that. So if we just take the idea that protein increases metabolism, and we kind of get that, then is there anything we can do that would make that work a little better? And so, then you start to get into some areas where there's some things we can look at doing. So one thing would be dietary isothiocyanates, and these are sulfur compounds that you find in things like mustards or wasabi, things that mustards, wasabi, things like that, horseradish. So these are things that not only we could say boost metabolism, but they actually target brown fat. They actually work on the uncoupling protein.
Really?
And so just combining.
Now, does this have anything to do with Scoville units and how hot they are, or is it simply this is another component that just happens to fall into these same types of foods?
So this isn't actually so much based on them being hot. This is based on more. Uncoupling, and just to kind of touch on that really quick. So when you hear this word thrown around a lot, you hear the word uncoupling when we talk about fat burning, and what we're talking about really is what's coupled. So what's coupled is oxygenation with ATP synthesis inside the mitochondria. So essentially breeding with making ATP. Those are coupled. And when we, quote unquote, uncouple that, then in different tissues you get different outcomes. So originally there's basically three types of uncoupling proteins. There's what we find in what we call brown fat. And the easy way to understand that is just hibernators, animals that need to go hibernate. And they make a lot of energy from uncoupling oxygen and production of ATP with brown fat. And so that's a big area of research right now, looking at, well, geez, that's pretty cool. How can we get our bodies?
I personally think it's a waste of time because we know how to build muscle. And the idea of making fat that burns calories, and by going through all of these, ice baths and supplements and all this other stuff. And we know that brown fat is transient. It doesn't stay brown. It's like once you brown it, it doesn't stay brown. You have to keep doing things to keep it. Just build more muscle, my attitude is.
Again, that gets into an interesting area. So one of the areas that's bubbling up in the research as a way to get the uncoupling protein activated in muscle, which increases resting metabolic rate.
Now we're talking. We're talking.
And now, so check this out. This gets really interesting. It's to deprive the body of leucine.
Wow, that's counterintuitive.
Yeah. So let's walk through that. So that's normally we think, well, gosh, to build muscle, I need to take a bunch of leucine, and that's gonna increase my metabolic rate. But it turns out that depriving the body of leucine actually induces uncoupling protein 3, which is what we find in the muscle.
Okay, I got to move fast with you because you're brilliant, and I have to squeeze everything I can out of you in an hour. So how long do you have to deprive the body of leucine in order to see this uncoupling effect? Can it be achieved in simple intermittent fasting?
Anecdotally speaking and personally, yes, I believe that it can, and I think there's a way to supercharge it. I think that when we look at the fact that, so leucine deprivation seems to activate uncoupling protein, meaning kicking up resting metabolic rate, not active thermogenesis, but resting metabolic rate in the muscle. So there's some other things that we can combine with that. So in a fasted state, we need long-chain fatty acids to really maximize these uncoupling proteins. So we need things like EPA. So it looks like quite possibly in a fasted state, the simple addition of omega-3s together with coffee in a fasted state might actually facilitate this in the muscle.
What if you don't drink coffee anymore? Is it the caffeine?
The caffeine is a natural AMP-K activator. I remember last year we did a show on AMP-K.
Right.
And it's just there's lots of AMP-K activators out there, but just a simple way to do that. The key seems to be the addition in a fasted state of long-chain fatty acids. So in order to get the activation of those proteins, the long-chain fatty acids, the omega-3s are kind of essential. So in that fasted state, if we throw in some omega-3s and something to activate AMP-K, coffee is kind of the simple one, then there's a sort of field of thought that maybe we get all that. Maybe we get leucine deprivation, we get increased resting metabolic rate in the muscle, and we get all these other goodies going on at the same time. So it's an area to tinker with, is what I would say.
Okay, so let's do some definitions real quick. So when we talk about increasing thermogenesis, what we're talking about is for the amount of work the body is doing, it's producing more heat because the work has a higher metabolic cost, if you will. When we talk about and that goes hand in hand with the uncoupling. When we talk about when we talk about raising resting metabolic rate, we're talking about just purely putting our foot on the gas pedal harder. We're not saying it has any effect on thermogenesis. We're just saying you're using more calories for whatever you're doing. When you combine the two, you actually are going to supercharge fat loss, right?
Yeah, that's at least in theory what we think we're doing, and there's some pretty good research actually to support that. So, getting the body to burn fat again gets into when we start depriving the body of leucine, we see fat loss goes up, which just kind of makes sense. I mean, think about that. Like, so what do you need leucine for? You need leucine to grow, right?
Right.
So when you're starving, there's no leucine around, and you tend to burn more fat. But it does bring up very similar to when we were at Quest talking about things like methionine depletion to extend lifespan. It looks like just the deprivation of a single amino acid in a diet. So you don't actually have to starve. You can just take leucine levels down to kick fat loss up and kicks up resting metabolic rate.
So what are some low leucine proteins? Plant proteins?
UGG, unfortunately. Yeah. Mostly the plant proteins. Yeah.
No, but I mean, look. So theoretically, if you're eating right, what I call eating right, you're not avoiding vegetables. You're eating lots of vegetables. they have plant protein in them, and you're getting animal protein. And so maybe what you do is you selectively do cycles of periods of time where you want to dig deeper into fat. And what you would do in those cases is probably eat higher plant proteins, less animal proteins, combined with intermittent fasting. You're going to dig deeper into your fat stores then.
Yeah, exactly. That's kind of what, just personally I've been doing. I have a book coming out where we talk about some things like that. But yeah, you're right on the money, Carl. As usual, you're right on the money.
Well, it's easy to connect the dots when somebody explains it to you. So, okay, so let's talk about...
You're a right on the money kind of guy. But yeah, it seems to be this thing of like, we've got people doing what they call intermittent fasting. And in that environment, what you want to do is we want to be getting lower methionine, lower leucine in the diet, and then there's some benefits of those things. So we can still actually eat. We can cycle our proteins around that so that we have more types of plant proteins, things that are increasing fat oxidation, and then bring that back into a cycle where you're having more animal protein, putting stuff back on, which matches a feasting and fasting cycle. I mean, the body knows what to do with that very well.
Are there any real supplements? I mean, I get caffeine. It raises your heart rate. It raises some resting metabolic factors, but perhaps not all. But are there any real supplements that either induce or can actually nudge uncoupling up a little bit? I mean, we know about DNP and we know about thyroid hormone because that's exactly what they do. But are there supplements that have an uncoupling effect on mitochondria?
Yeah, there's some promising stuff out there. Let me kind of cover some of the newer stuff, which isn't generally known. So a really promising substance is called epilactose.
How do you spell that?
It's EPI, and then lactose.
Okay.
So it's what's called an epimer. It's a polymer. It's a derivative of lactose. It's a disaccharide. And it's in milk that's been heated up in very small amounts. But we've basically figured out how to make the stuff now. And so supplementing with epilactose now, there's some evidence bubbling up that it actually does all the above. It actually increases the uncoupling proteins. So it actually looks like it increases thermogenesis. And it does a lot of other things that seem very promising. It's a pretty powerful prebiotic, and there's a whole host of other things that it seems to target. But it's fairly promising in terms of perhaps this is something that either alone or in combination with long-chain fatty acids and maybe even sort of a fasting profile could really supercharge this stuff.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, what else?
Another one. Go ahead.
No, I just said what else. You were going to do that anyway. Go ahead.
Another one is a very special kind of fat, and this is called oleophenylene. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. It's oleophenylene.
Does that mean it comes from olive oil?
No, not particularly, but it's a type of fat, and it seems to target the uncoupling proteins. It's a long chain fat, but this very specifically seems to go after uncoupling protein 1, which is what we find in brown fat. And so this is also something that seems to be a supplement that's something you could take, and it's just a fat, so it's not that esoteric. But you haven't heard a lot about it yet, but probably in the next couple of years you will. And it seems to be just another supplement you can take that actually stimulates uncoupling.
And so, do these also produce elevated heat? Do you sweat more on these? Because obviously, I would expect to feel a sense of warmth because you're actually producing more energy per unit of work. So would you see that using these two, the epilactose and the oleic salamine or whatever it is?
Yeah, I'd say in theory. I mean, so the whole idea with these types of things is, again, when you're talking uncoupling proteins and we're talking thermogenesis, we're talking making more heat, then we're always talking about fat. That's what we're talking about. We're talking about uncoupling and brown fat.
Okay.
That's what we're talking about when we're talking about stuff. And so always, we associate heat with that, and that's kind of the gist of these types of things.
Okay.
But then we got to differentiate that between uncoupling in fat and uncoupling in muscle. Uncoupling in muscle is a completely different animal. So uncoupling in the muscle is not associated with thermogenesis, but it is associated with increasing resting metabolic rate.
And is that affected by low leucine intake on uncoupling in muscle?
Yes.
It
looks
makes
like
sense. It makes sense. So
yeah, and that's kind of so if we want to look at an overall body strategy, where we can get kind of the best of both. So you've got intermittent fasting when the body's deprived of food, but then you have periods around that where maybe you are eating, but a simple strategy to continue the benefits of increased fat oxidation that you saw during intermittent fasting is just pulling leucine levels down a bit.
Omega-3s are completely ignored by the keto community. What do you think about that? MCT oil, coffee, and omega-3s?
So when you look at the nature of what we're talking about here, and again, all this stuff gets down to really like moving stuff back and forth across the inner mitochondrial membrane and the combination of coupling oxygen with making ATP within the mitochondria. And so when you look at like, well, what really supercharges that? The short chain fatty acids don't have the same horsepower that the long chain fatty acids do because the carbon chains are long. The oxygen can cycle down the chain much longer, and so there's an inherent power in the long chain fatty acids when it comes to uncoupling that is not found in the medium chain or the short chain. And so again, you're right on the money, Carl.
Omega-3s cannot become butyrate the way saturated fats can. But what they fail to realize is the machinery in the gut that produces butyrate. Actually, it's two different microbes in the gut. One does something, it passes off to the other. The other one poops out the butyrate. Those are actually increased in proliferation through omega-3s. So while you may be while you are focusing on the end product, you're ignoring the manufacturing process by ignoring omega-3 fatty acids. Would you say that's a true statement?
Yeah, and I would also maybe add on to that. And this is one of the things that we do in the VEEP system and in my Transcend system, is we really focus on butyrate production. And one of the barriers you're going to get into is that your best sources to really drive that are carbs. So it's carbohydrates. It's things that things like beans, things like potatoes, things like that. Those are the things or fruits. Those are the things that are going to really drive butyrate production as a result of spinning up substrate for very specific bacteria like the phytobacteria, the butyrate producers, bananas, things like that. Those are your heavy lifters when it comes to the production of butyrate. And so when you get into a mindset that a lot of keto people have, well, we got to stay away from carbs, then you're limiting the horsepower available to you to get the body to make butyrate.
Well, what you just said may actually save a lot of people wasted time, because there are so many people out there who say, I've been keto for 6 months and I can't lose any weight. And they may not be producing the butyrate that they think they're producing because they're avoiding these I want to say they're called, but they're a certain type of fiber, right? They're monosaccharide. What are they called? The types of fibers that you're talking about that actually help to produce butyrate as well.
Well, there's several. So it gets down to substrate. It gets down to, at the end of the day, the way we make butyrate is we make bacteria that make butyrate, and so we have to look at like what are the foods that those bacteria eat. What's the substrate? And so there's kind of a short list of things we want to look at. We want to look at phenols from fruits. We want to look at resistant starches from things like beans, things like that. We want to look at cellulose, wood. We want to look at things like that are real heavy, raw, fibrous, green bean kind of snappy, crunchy starches. That's our horsepower to make butyrate. And so what you see with a lot of people that do long-term keto diets, what they're doing is they're essentially starving the gut biome of the substrate it needs. And so what happens is a little known thing is that particularly bifidobacteria, they control fat metabolism through the production of very important proteins. These are called angioproteins, and these proteins control fatty acid uptake. And so when you deprive the body of the substrate it needs to feed bifido and these very special bacteria, then what happens over time is you actually get an obesogenic gut biome profile. So, and there's good research to show that long-term keto diets actually you wind up with an obesogenic gut profile, and that's why they can't lose weight, is because you're losing the bacteria that basically inhibit fat storage.
We're talking right now with Joel Greene. He is brilliant when it comes to nutrition. Few people have the 60,000-foot view on nutrition that Joel has, and you can leverage his intelligence by going to his website, veep.com, veep.com. Check it out. We'll be right back with more Superhuman Radio. GHKCU is one of the most effective peptides for rebuilding more youthful skin, reversing skin damage, diminishing wrinkles, and tightening loose skin. I personally use Restoracell with GHKCU every day. It's making an undeniable difference in the quality of my skin. Restoracell is fantastic for all types of skin. Now you can order Restoracell and save 25% when you use the code SHR25. That's SHR25. While you may be diligent in your workouts and your diet, don't neglect what people see first and foremost, and that's your skin. Go to shrnetwork.biz/blue and use code SHR25 today. Remember those rectangular toaster pastries you used to love when you were a kid? Well, Legendary Foods has just made them better. The new cake-style tasty pastry is like nothing you've ever had before. With 20 grams of high-quality protein and less than 1 gram of sugar, you'll feel like you're cheating, but you're not. Go to shrnetwork.biz/legendary and use the code SHR10 to save 10% off your purchase of tasty pastries. Now available in cookies and cream, red velvet cake, birthday cake, blueberry, strawberry, brown sugar cinnamon, and hot fudge sundae. Go to shrnetwork.biz/legendary and use code SHR10 today. Are you suffering from signs of an unhappy gut? Diversity is the key to healthy, robust inner ecosystem. Body Ecology probiotic liquids are made by fermenting organic seeds, biodynamic brown rice, and chickpeas together to create a diverse culture found nowhere else on Earth. It's the secret to restoring your gut's microbiome for a healthier digestive tract, improved immune function, and longevity. Take 20% off by visiting the website shrnetwork.biz/bodyeco. shrnetwork.biz/bodyeco. That's BODYECO. And using the code SHR20. There have been no new innovations in men's underwear for hundreds of years. That's all about to change with Sheath. Sheath creates 2 separate compartments for your man stuff so it doesn't get smashed into a mound and sweaty and stinky. I won't wear any other underwear now that I've learned about Sheath, and you won't either. Go to shrnetwork.biz/Sheath underwear. That's SHEATHUNDERWEAR. Use code SUPERHUMAN to save 20% off. I promise you, once you try a pair of Sheath underwear, you will never wear anything else. There are lots of concerns about food supply today. That's why you need White Oak Pastures. White Oak Pastures will deliver food right to your doorstep. You don't even have to go out and be disappointed by shopping in grocery stores. The finest beef, pork, lamb, duck, and more can be found at White Oak Pastures. And now they even have seafood. And best of all, White Oak Pastures has a negative carbon footprint, which means that you don't have to feel guilty for eating your ribeye. Go to shrnetwork.biz/white oak and use the code SUPERHUMAN to save 15% off.
This is the Superhuman Channel. Evolution just got kicked up a notch.
We're talking right now with Joel Greene, the proprietor of an amazing nutritional website. It's called Veep, VEEP.com. So, Joel, we know that bacteroidetes and firmicutes, they tend to have different effects on the body, and when one outnumbers the other, we see obesity. When one outnumbers the other, we see leanness. The one that's associated with obesity is a much more efficient microbe at harvesting nutrition from food, right?
Well, yeah, so that gets into what's called energy harvest. It's really a third phyla that does the heavy lifting, and that third phyla is called the actinobacteria. And that is the home of the bifidobacteria, which is, I use this analogy in my book that's coming up of the Legion of Doom and the Justice League. So most people have a Legion of Doom in their gut. They have like a very few bacteria that are just basically wrecking the ship. And there's a very few bacteria that are that essentially confer superhuman status, and they do a lot of things. That's Akkermansia, Mucinifera, that's Bifidobacteria, a couple others. And so these bacteria, the really cool thing about it is that they are switchable. We can actually control them just by giving them the right substrate. And some interesting things happen when we give them the right substrate. One is that energy metabolism goes through the roof. And so in our discussion of, well, how do you increase what we call metabolism? How do you get more energy? The bacteria in our gut have a lot to do with that. For example, the bifidobacteria are B vitamin producers. They're really good at that stuff. And I do these 2-day seminars. And in that, we just prove it to people. We go, hey, here's this on day one. Just start eating this. And by the end of the day, you're going to be jacked. Your energy is going to be through the roof. And it's very easy to prove. So there gets the concept called energy harvest. And the bacteria in our gut, they actually, it's not so much the calories you take in, it's the calories you're actually extracting from food.
Right.
And that's something that the idea that we can play with that. We can just through feeding substrate to these bacteria, we can spin them up, is a very interesting thing, and it's very doable. Anybody that wants to can experiment with it and really see it happen. In fact, my first experiment with this was in 2007. There was a landmark study published by Dr. Jeffrey Gordon. It was the first study linking obesity with the gut bacteria. And I did an article on that on my site, lookcut.com. And to my knowledge, I think it was probably one of the first, maybe the first articles that actually was based on Dr. Gordon's research to the health and fitness community. And I just did an experiment on my own. I did very, very specific fibers for about 7 days. And body fat I was 229 when I started. I was 212 when I finished. I went and got weighed in water, and I was like 6.7%. And like running the math in 7 days of how many calories I burned, I was like, well, that's just not possible. That should be impossible, mathematically speaking. But what I believe was I just altered energy harvest through radically altering the gut. And around the office here, we have a funny word for it. We call it the equestrian bowel movement. It's like a poor man's U-biome test. When your poop turns green, you know you did something.
Yeah, that's funny. That is funny. A patina, a patinaed poop. Let's talk more about supplements for a minute. Are there any other supplements that we should be paying attention to that can nudge us a little bit, give us that extra 1% or 2% body fat loss? Because you got to be working. You know, I don't want anybody listening to the show and think if you do these 10 things or these 12 things without the hard work and conscious effort to eat good, healthy foods, you're not going to lose body fat. But the idea of this is give you that extra percentage of body fat loss and for all of your hard efforts. Are there any other supplements out there that we should be looking at?
Yeah, actually. So it was funny when you called me about this conversation. There was I think a sponsor on your show had a product, and we were just kind of talking, and I pulled the label up, and they had some pyruvate and some carnitines in there.
Trojan horse. Their ad actually ran a second ago, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so yeah, that's actually a very good product. So years ago there was a pyruvate product that had carnitine and pyruvate in it that I used to use prior to cardio. And the trick is the dosing. You got to have a bunch of the stuff in there. But man, when it's in there, holy cow! Watch what happens during your cardio. I mean, you get hot. So the carnitines. And I know this is kind of a malign school of thought, but like if you actually work through what the body needs to push fat into the mitochondria, you know, you need carnitine to do that. And then in conjunction with pyruvate, it's actually very effective at specifically like what we would call increasing metabolic rate, metabolic function. So I would say, yeah, that's a legit supplement.
Cool. I'm going to tell PJ Braun that you said that about that. So that's fantastic to know.
Yeah. So
if you were going to start to assemble things, if you were going to tell people, here's the things that you should start doing. Eat more brown mustard and wasabi in your diet. That sounds like a good one. Obviously, the supplements that you mentioned, are they even on the market yet? I know Trojan Horse is, but the other one, the Oleo one, and what was the other one that you mentioned before? Are they even on the market at this point in time?
Epilactose.
Yeah, epilactose.
I don't believe they are yet. You can get them if you're savvy, which the reason I brought them up is your audience is always looking for kind of what's new before it's new. And so those are things that are obtainable. You can get those things and be the first kid in your block to play with those things.
Yeah.
But as an overall strategy, so one of the things that we do in the Veep system is we take layers of things that are all functional and then we stack them. So let's start with the basic idea that protein is highly functional, and dense protein, slow digesting protein, is extremely functional for helping to boost metabolism. And like an easy way to prove this to yourself that I've done this is just have, like a dozen egg whites at bedtime and go to sleep. If you wake up, you just tend to be warmer. It's because all that protein is just playing out through the night. But when you look at like sort of proteins as your foundational layer for boosting metabolism, and then you just start stacking things on top of that, it's actually very easy to create a sort of functional eating that is extremely effective at increasing metabolic rate. And a simple way to do that would be like if you wanted to start with an omelet at breakfast, and then on top of that you add all of the isothianate things. So you're adding things like onions and things like that into the mix, and then you're adding on top of that things that are thermogenic in nature, things like hot sauce and things like that. And then on top of that, you're adding things like cheese, which dairy gets kind of a bad rap, but dairy does a lot of things really good for fat loss. And so just by literally stacking functional components, it's like a recipe. In a recipe, you have ingredients, you have sequence, and you have timing. And when you make all three work together, you get something really great. But you can have the right ingredients and not the right sequence, and you don't get the same outcome. But just by looking at the basic elements of different classes of things, there are certain things that are thermogenic in nature. The easy example is cayenne or capsaicin. That's just thermogenic in nature. Protein's thermogenic in nature. The isocyanates, they are brown fat uncouplers. And then you look at things like onions, and you just begin to start stacking all these things up together in a single meal. And it's really, really powerful. I have a storyline.
Go ahead. No, tell yours. I was going to ask you why onions, but tell your story first.
Oh, sure. Just to give you an example, we had a storyline a couple of years ago on the Dr. Phil show. We've actually had quite a few storylines on the show. But just to make it fast, we had a woman who went on the show. She was on 22 meds all at once. And she was given 5 years to live by her doctor. And so she goes on the show. They put her on my program. And she hurts her leg in the very first week. And she can't work out. So she's 322 pounds, 22 meds. She goes on the show. And then at the 90-day mark, they bring her in for a blood test, and she's under doctor's supervision. Blood comes back. It's normal. So the doctor's like, well, that's not right. Let's send her to a specialist. So they send her to a specialist. Blood comes back again, and it's normal. So they took her off all 22 meds at the 90-day mark. And the point of that story is there's no drug in existence that could do that. That's 100% the power of food when it's used functionally. And so there's tremendous power inherent in food when you begin to really utilize it and stack it in the way that we're talking about. Our unsung hero in all this is alcohol. So studies with heavy drinkers have shown that when you take out carbs, you substitute alcohol, they get lean. And it's really just that alcohol increases metabolism. So alcohol is a poison that gets converted. The body has to convert it out, make it into acetate, and get rid of it. And so in the process of doing that, it actually increases metabolic rate. If you've ever woken up in the middle of the night with the shakes, anybody that's ever done that knows that. So one of the kind of fun things that we do in the Veep system is we actually teach people how to offset the negative effects of alcohol. It just happens, so you have to learn how to do it. And it's really simple. You combine alcohol with very dense protein, and so protein boosts metabolism, alcohol boosts metabolism, and then you have to offset all the negative effects of alcohol. I'm not an advocate of alcohol consumption. I'm just saying it happens, and if it does happen, you might as well make it help you burn fat instead of store fat.
What role does acetate play in alcohol's functional food melody?
The main trick is this. Alcohol gets converted into cetylaldehyde, and the body has to convert that out into acetate, one of the short-chain fatty acids. And so while the body is dealing with the poisonous form of alcohol, that gets priority. So poisons always get priority. So if there is any kind of carbohydrate or fat present, then that tends to get stored. So it's really about understanding substrate preference for the body. When you're poisoning the body the body has to get rid of that poison. And so if you ate a bunch of pasta with that, you're going to promote weight gain. But if instead you take the heavy drinker model and you just substitute your carbs with alcohol, and then you include dense proteins, and then all the things that we're talking about here, the carnitines and all that, to offset the negative effects of alcohol, then the desired outcome of increasing metabolism, you gain that while mitigating the effects.
Let's go ahead and take another quick commercial break. When we come back, we'll wrap this up.
Dogs should be powered by fat and protein, not carbs. That's why Visionary Pet makes low-carb, ketogenic dog food for dogs of all breeds and life stages. From kibble to freeze-dried and even low-carb treats, all Visionary Pet recipes are very low-carb, ketogenic, and made with 100% real meat protein. Shop now and use code SHR for 20% off your first order today. Your dog deserves the lifelong benefits of optimal nutrition. Make the switch to Visionary and see why smart dogs eat low-carb.
Never before has a product been so appropriately named as Botanic Tonics Feel Free. This plant-based elixir combines a variety of different effective compounds, all from raw plant materials that at different doses provide you with completely different experiences. A third of a bottle puts you in the zone and makes you very focused and is ideal for a non-stimulating pre-workout. It also has a mild analgesic effect for us older lifters who have soreness and little pains and aches that keep us from training as ferociously as we want. A half a bottle will create a mild euphoric effect that will allow you to forego consuming alcohol but still be socially lubricated and have fun. I have never had a product deliver on its name the way Botanic Tonics Feel Free does, and I won't ever be without it, and you shouldn't either. Go to shrnetwork.biz/feelfree and use the code SHR40 for 40% off your first order. I promise you, you will not be disappointed. P3OM from Bioptimizers is a patented prebiotic and probiotic supplement with Lactobacillus plantarum OM. It has now been upgraded to P3OM 2.0 with the addition of a superfood formulation that makes it 2 times stronger, as well as optimizes L. plantarum's strength, so it's more powerful than ever, which means that not only will it help you completely digest all animal proteins, it also reduces cortisol, causes deep relaxation and better sleep, and reduces stress. Go to shrnetwork.biz/P3-OM today and use the code SHR10 to save 10% off. I would easily say that I am the hugest proponent you will ever meet to doing anything that will improve the quality of my sleep. And that's because sleep is linked to just about every metabolic disorder we see in our population today. One of the easiest things you can do to improve the quality of your sleep is to get a pillow that can be shaped into the exact form factor that allows you to get your best night's sleep. And that is MyPillow. I've been sleeping with MyPillow for a few years now, and I can tell you that when I have to travel and stay in hotels, I don't get a good night's sleep because I don't have MyPillow with me. Right now, you can save up to 60% off of everything offered to improve the quality of your sleep at shrnetwork.biz/mypillow when you use the code SHR. Or you can call toll-free 800-889-4938. And remember to use code SHR to save up to 60% off of everything at their website.
New Mass Pro Synthogen X2 just upped its own legendary game. To distance itself even further from the rest of the pack, Synthogen X2 now has double the key active ingredients. If you've ever wondered what steroid-like recovery feels like, Synthogen X2 delivers. See why others compare it favorably to powerful bodybuilding drugs at Synthogen.com. Mass Pro Synthogen. When you train with it, you'll gain with it.
You're listening to the Superhuman Channel. We're ripped and we're ready.
Talking with Joel Greene, proprietor of veep.com, the genius behind the website. I don't know many people who understand nutrition the way Joel does and the way he assembles everything. It would do you real good to check out the website and learn more about the things that he offers.
So this is kind of next level stuff that I'll leave the audience with. But so we talked about the power of food, and we talked about the example from the Dr. Phil show, the lady who just, you could never do what she did with a drug. It was all the power of food. And I've seen this thousands of times played out, that when executed in the right recipe, food is more powerful than anything. And so this is kind of taking things to the next level. So the idea of like getting meaningful increases in metabolic activity through food. So we've got a lot of people in the audience that are into intermittent fasting and keto diets and all that kind of stuff. But when we really look at like the the exchange of signal pathways that has to happen to get the maximum sort of results out of things like that. All the potentiators, all the substrates for that we find in the world of carbs. And so if we look at something like, let's take grapefruit, for example. Grapefruit has a compound called Leucine in it, which is a natural AMPK activator, which is something we want to go after in an intermittent fast. And if you look at something like that the day before a fast, and then you combine strategies, so at the same time you're spinning up production of butyrate producers, which also potentiates AMPK, which also mimics the effects of exercise. Now we're into legitimate functional nutritive outcomes that are doing all the above. They're increasing metabolic activity, they're increasing signal pathways, they're increasing signal amplification, all the benefits that we want to get that increase metabolic activity, fat oxidation, all of the youth-promoting aspects. And it's all the way we're timing, sequencing, and using very specific food substrates.
So let me get this straight. Eat grapefruit the day before fasting.
Yes, and this gets into a combination of things. But yes, grapefruit with what I would call bifidogenic foods. So a good example simplest example would be chili, for example. So you could have like grapefruit for breakfast, chili for lunch, and what you're doing is and at first this kind of sounds like just, nutrition sophistry, like some of the BS you see on TV. But if you actually break down the signal substrates that we're giving the body, we're giving the body the substrate it needs to make the bacteria that make butyrate, that make that signal activation of the signal pathways during fasting. We're just potentiating it the day before. Now we're on to something that's next level here. And this is something that we've been doing actually for a number of years here, and it's just amazingly powerful. I mean, you can work out less, you get similar results, and it's all based on sequencing and timing of very specific foods and substrates in combination to amplify key signals.
I'm not training with a pre-workout right now, a drink, a meal at all, because I've gone back to training fasted. I tend to like to train fasted. But when I was using a pre-workout supplement, I discovered that combining protein, carbohydrates, and ketones, and this fat in the protein powder, all together gave me the greatest results. Your thoughts on that?
Man, that's fascinating. Okay, so I would first, you got me thinking about something while you were talking that I'm going to bring up. But my first reaction to what you were saying was, well, there's no historical analog. Like ketones are the byproduct of starvation, so never in human history that the body had to deal with signal input of starvation at the same time with a bunch of food. That being said, what you got me thinking about was, the body's really, when you look at like the software that runs the body in terms of substrate partitioning, the body is really good at delivering the right substrate to the right tissue at the right time, depending on what it needs.
Right.
And it's got multiple backup pathways to do this, and it also works in reverse. It works for fat oxidation as well. The body's got multiple redundant pathways to protect against anything you try to do to create fat loss. And so both energy utilization and fat mobilization, the body's got lots of pathways to deal with. I mean, it's got thousands of years of programming in there figuring out what to do. And so I think you brought up kind of an uninvestigated area that is, we'll have to wait for the science to tell us what's really happening. But it may be that there's something at work here that is very tissue specific, and the body just knows what to do with it. My first thought when you said that is I don't see that, but I'll have to try that.
Think about something. So when you're fasted and you're producing ketones, and I'm not talking about therapeutic levels of ketones. I'm talking about maybe even sub 0.5 millimoles of ketones. You still have blood sugar, right? You still have blood sugar. You still have glucose in your body that's running around and supposedly doing something. It's got to be being used by some tissue. So it's undeniable that ketones and glucose occur in the human body at the same time in certain circumstances. And if that's the case, then that means that some tissue is using ketones and some tissue is using glucose. I mean, I don't know anything about science. I don't have any letters after my name, but I can guarantee you that the body wouldn't. If the body just needed ketones, it would drop out glucose completely. Your glucose would go to zero.
Well, here's an interesting historical analog. Actually, I just thought of, and we use this actually in this is done somewhat in deep, and it's really done in my Transcend system. And basically, if you look at the historical analog, what do people do? What hunter-gatherers do when they're kind of at the food of last resort? Like you have a cut, they say. Like what's last resort? Last resort is you start digging up roots.
Mm-hmm.
And so in a starved state, you're taking in very dense fibers that have, there's carbs in that. It's not dense with
right.
carbs, but you're still getting in fibers and carbs at the same time in a starved state. And that has a very very specific effect on the body in a starved state. And just hypothesizing here, just guessing, I think that it's linked to peak power output in a starved state. Because when you look at all the signal pathways, what happens in a starved state? The body starts doing some really interesting stuff. It starts building up levels of ATP. In other words, building up essentially what we call sugar reserves inside the cell, but it doesn't use them. So it builds them up, but it doesn't use them. And what it's doing is it's prepping you essentially for a last-ditch sprint.
Yeah, to run after that gazelle and try to catch it and kill it so you can eat it.
Right,
exactly.
But that's in a starved state. So you see this sort of glucose-sparing effect where glucose levels are being restored, or not glucose, but ATP levels are being restored, but they're not being utilized. And that's really interesting in a starved state. So maybe there is actually a historical analog for what you're talking about. It's interesting what you bring up.
I just know that I was able to train the longest when I took all of them. And that's when I started to think to myself, why am I digging my heels in and picking a group? No, this. No, that. Let my body decide what it wants to use by what tissue at the moment that it wants to change. It may switch. It may switch back and forth to ketones for this. So in electrical function, you have bumper capacitors. They store up juice, and then they allow it to come out very, very quickly to get an elevator moving. Getting an elevator moving takes 10 times more power than it does to keep it moving, so they use bumper capacitors. Well, maybe glucose is the bumper capacitor. Maybe when you first grab that bar and yank it, glucose is doing the job. But if ketones are available, the body's like, okay, we can coast on ketones right now. Let's save the glucose. Why would I want to restrict one substrate and say to the body, no, because I belong to the keto group, you've got to use ketones? No, I don't want to do that to my body. I want my body to use what it wants to use.
Let me ask you a question. Have you ever noticed any symptoms of like the keto flu?
I've never ever gotten keto flu, never. And I know people who tell me they got it. I don't know what it is. Do people get the keto flu from just, I don't know. I've never had keto flu. But then again, I probably have been metabolically flexible for a very, very long time and just not realized it because I didn't know what metabolic flexibility was all about.
I'm just curious because I have this working idea of my own that it has to do with sort of mixing substrates, wrong time, wrong place.
I actually asked Dominic D'Agostino that question. I said, do you think that keto flu is because, because I was thinking of like diabetics for a second. I was like, is it like ketoacidosis? You think it's like because they have high levels of ketones and glucose? And he told me that the levels of ketones would have to be like 24 millimoles and the level of glucose would have to be like something ridiculous, like, I don't know, 350 or 400 milligrams a liter. It's got to be absurd levels, like where you're at the end stages of your diabetes to get that. And I said, do you think that is what happens to normal people when they get keto flu? They have, high levels of both, and he didn't think so. He said, no, I don't think that's it.
Well, that's interesting. What I would be curious about. So when you look at like per cell and on a cell by cell basis, and you looked at signal changing the train tracks from ATP to backup reserves, and you look at AMPK activation. You see these are kind of almost like black and white channels on a cellular basis. So you see that when ADP gets below a certain level in AMP, kicks up beyond a certain ratio, then you get this sort of switch activation, and it's very much black and white within that particular cell. And so then you see all these sort of catabolic processes kicking in place, which have a lot of good benefits associated with them. And that would be a really interesting thing because, particularly in the muscle tissue, it seems to be a little on the side of black and white in terms of once the AMP-K switch gets fired, then we see like this whole signal pathway kick into place and how muscles use energy, and there's this whole glucose sparing effect that happens. And
but it may be that muscles prefer that one substrate once they get working. But other tissue in the body that, we all know that fatigue starts in the brain, not in peripheral muscle.
Absolutely. I was just thinking the same thing. Yeah.
And so, maybe the muscle's like this, but the brain is like, hey, we could pick and choose. This portion of the brain is using ketones. That portion is using glucose. The naivete to think that the whole body and all of its tissue gets together in unison and goes, oh, ketones, we'll just run on that. Everybody? Okay. No, I mean, the body is so complex. It's like, there's tissue that's probably prefers glucose over ketones. And maybe that's where keto flu comes from. It's like that tissue is saying, no, we don't want to do this. So.
Well, here's the other thing, too. A lot of your workout results, your workout intensity, are actually driven by substrate available in your brain, your ability to focus, and
right.
And that's where a huge chunk of energy needs are coming from, and so it may just be that.
Yeah, I just think it's fascinating because it's like the old Reese peanut butter commercials. You remember them? The two trucks are going down the road. One's got chocolate, one's got peanut butter. They have an accident. And the two drivers are yelling at each other, and the one guy's holding his chocolate bar, and it's got peanut butter on it. The other guy's holding the handful of peanut butter, it's got chocolate in it, and they're right about to fight, and then they taste it, and they go, wow, this is great. And then all of a sudden, they like love each other, right? It's like, it's so silly. Like, why are we fighting about this, Yeah.
You've got peanut butter in my chocolate.
Yeah.
Chocolate in my peanut butter.
Yes, you remember it. You do it perfectly. That's it. That's it.
Delicious.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Yeah.
You've gotten ketones in my glucose. You've gotten glucose in my ketones. The website is Veep, VEEP.com. You can harness the genius, the nutritional genius of Joel Greene. Joel, thanks for coming on today and talking. And you really did drop some pearls of wisdom here today on potential supplements and stuff. And I'm definitely going to be adding more wasabi to my diet. That's for sure.
Well, thanks for having me on.
All right. I'll talk to you soon, brother.
All right, man. Thanks.